So when the boys made the leap from page to screen, it was never about directly translating panels into scenes, because adapting the boys into a show basically meant making dozens of deliberate choices about tone, character, and purpose, and nowhere is that more obvious than in how the show reshapes its characters. Any comic enthusiast of the franchise has noticed how heroes were stripped down into anti-heroes, anti-heroes spiraled into outright villains, and some other familiar names were given entirely new moral alignments compared to what we read in the source material. In Garth Ennis's original books, several of these characters weren't actually obstacles or even enemies, for that matter. In fact, they were allies who were trusted, respected, and sometimes even mourned as they fought alongside the boys instead of going against them. The show, however, completely flips that dynamic in order to create more conflict and tension, opposed to how cooperative and kinda good these characters were behind the panels. It's honestly fascinating to witness these changes because of how much or how little remains the same, because sure, the names and costumes are definitely familiar, but once you get to know them in the show, their roles don't exactly ring with the same familiarity. If your only exposure to the boys comes from its streaming adaptation, you might think you know these characters, but in truth, you've only met one version. And the differences are far more dramatic than you might expect. So, without wasting another moment, let's discuss 4 villains from the show who were actually kinda good guys in the boys' comics. Love Sausage. We first meet Love Sausage in the 2nd season of the Amazon show when he was locked up in a cell at the Sage Grove Center and being secretly dosed with Compound V. All we ever get to know about this guy in the show is that he was born in Russia sometime in the early 1980s before eventually moving to the US. After he was committed for being mentally unstable and dangerous, Vasily Voroshikin kept being used as a test subject for VOD International to create a stabilized form of Compound V for adults that successfully granted him superhuman powers and transformed him into a soup. During his initial appearance, Frenchie, Kimiko, and Mother's Milk break into the security surveillance room of the Sage Grove Center, and that's when Mother's Milk makes a comment about the man's love sausage. Vasily later breaks out of the facility when another patient named Cindy frees him, and during this time, we actually find out his true superpowers. When a long tentacle tries to strangle Mother's Milk, Kimiko runs to punch Love Sausage and knock him out. That's when Mother's Milk and Frenchie come to the horrible realization that this tentacle was actually Love Sausage's, as we see it retract back into his body. Eventually, in Season 3, we see Love Sausage greet Mother's Milk and Starlight at the door of the Herogasm party, and as he begins showing off his penis, it ends up getting caught in Soldier Boy's blast, thus leaving him with a burnt, limp, depowered penis. Eventually, he fixes that issue with some strong doses of Compound V, and in Season 4, we see him working with Homelander's operation to ambush Mother's Milk in a bathroom and strangle him unconscious with his super penis. However, in the first episode of the 5th season, Mother's Milk goes out of his way to track him down and pretty much chops up Love Sausage's big sausage like a party sub by stabbing it continuously with a piece of broken wood before he ends up dead after being strangled by his own penis. Now, Vasily appears in the 11th issue of the Garth Ennis comics when the boys travel to Moscow for an important mission, but not before making a pit stop to meet a burly, vodka-soaked Russian bartender named Vasily Voroshikin, who was formerly known as Love Sausage. In the comics, he used to be a police officer, a tank commander, and a genuine Soviet-era superhero who led a team called the Glorious 5-Year Plan alongside the Tractor, Purge, Red Banner, and Collectivo during the Soviet Union days. However, after the fall of the Soviet Union, Vass was disillusioned with both his homeland and the corporate direction towards which the superheroes were heading, so he retired and opened a bar because he still very much loved the vodka he made from brake fluid and communism. Here too, his superhero name is attested to his super strong and durable foot-long penis, which stops him from running straight when he's turned on. Having said that, in the comics, Love Sausage is surprisingly altruistic, he's super friendly with the boys, and is probably one of the only well-meaning soups. He's also one of the only soups in the entire 72-issue run who gets a pass from Butcher because, well, he earned it. We also see Vass fight alongside the boys against Stormfront because, as a former tank commander, he knows exactly what a Nazi is and has no interest in letting one live. When Butcher finally turns on everyone in the endgame, it takes 3 RPGs to bring Vass down, and even then he manages to send Huey an automated warning message before his death in the form of a code for an email address that revealed Butcher's true agenda, so even during his final moments in the comic, he died protecting his friend. Low-key, it's kinda sad how the Amazon show stripped this character of his history, camaraderie, and the bond he shared with the boys, only for them to reduce him to an anatomical joke.
I know you.
Tech Knight. The Amazon show's depiction of this guy makes him a villain in the truest sense, and the contrast initially hit the comic readers so hard because behind the panels, Tech Knight was one of the rare heroes who never really caught any attention from the boys, as he never really did anything that was morally incorrect or depraved. In fact, Butcher even found him boring, even though he seemed to be a good enough guy. Tech Knight was the founding member of Payback in the source material, but his brain tumor forced him to get involved in compulsive sexual behavior with literally anything that had a hole, be it a living being or an inanimate object. This guy was actually the third person in the comics to hold this moniker and was one of the few supes without any superpowers, meaning he had to rely completely on technology instead. He was also one of the primary suspects behind the murder of Steve Rubinstein, but his innocence was proven when Tech Knight's butler's nephew, Swing Wing, turned out to be the true culprit. Over time, he tried to medically fix his sex addiction, but simply couldn't, which ended with him being thrown out of Payback and being isolated from all his friends. Soon after, his issues were revealed to the public when his butler, Thomas, exposed him on paper after Tech Knight tried to literally ear rape him, and that's when a humiliated Robert Vernon gave up being Tech Knight. As his mental health kept deteriorating, one day, while walking through the streets of NYC, he saved a mother and her child from being crushed by what he thought was debris from a gigantic planet-destroying asteroid. So in his head, he resumed being Tech Knight and chose to destroy the asteroid by flying into space and pretty much having intercourse with it until it exploded. That allowed him to die happy, believing that he could finally become a hero by saving the world, but in reality, dude actually sacrificed himself by stepping in front of a falling wheelbarrow in order to save the woman and her baby, and everything else was simply a hallucination because it was later revealed in an autopsy that Tech Knight had a large tumor in his brain that led to his perverted behavior. Now, even if this soup was strange, troubled, and frequently embarrassing, Tech Knight always tried to be a hero in his own confusing way. The Amazon show completely derails that by introducing a version of the character who's beyond any redemption, and we know him as a clever and selfish dude who only cares for his reputation, his fame, his wealth, and, well, really just himself. He was initially introduced in Gen V as a celebrity detective who arrived at Godolphin University to seemingly investigate Golden Boy's death. In reality, he simply wanted to find a scapegoat to frame and cover up Vought's experiments. Tech Knight is also a casual racist in the show, even if he donates to charitable causes that don't align with his worldview. In fact, he even takes pride in his family's history and boasts about how they acquired their wealth by starting out as slave catchers. By Season 4, Tech Knight was hosting fundraisers for Homelander's alt-right political movement, imprisoned Huey and subjected him to extreme torture, and was fully aligned with Homelander's fascist agenda. Not just that, he was also a sexual abuser who once kept his sidekick, Ladio, chained up in his sex chamber, albeit he seems more like a masochist after his history with Ashley Barrett. Given that Tech Knight in the show has been a bad guy, ideologically, institutionally, and personally, his actions ultimately led to his fall as his butler strangled him after losing it from being forced through so many years of abuse. So, as opposed to the broken man from the comics who meets his end doing the right thing, in the show, Tech Knight's character is used to comment on wealthy racists who get through life without facing any consequences until it eventually becomes their undoing. The Deep. In the show, Kevin Kohler, who's popularly known as the Deep, always seems to make the worst possible decision available to him, which of course makes him a consistent villain in the show. In fact, he literally starts off Season 1 by sexually assaulting Starlight, and that goes on to become the defining moment of his character for everything that follows. Since then, Kevin has been demoted, exiled, and humiliated before eventually being pulled back in, but even then, the assault has always been the foundation of who he is. He's a member of the Seven and an aquatic superhero with the ability to breathe underwater and communicate with sea animals. However, ever since he defected from the Church of the Collective, the Deep has become a favorite on the national talk show circuit with the success of his ghost-written memoir, Deeper, which documents his escape from the cult. His wife, Cassandra, kept coaching him along the way, so he was finally getting the recognition he believed he deserved, but none of that compared to him being an aquatic superhero in the Seven, so he wanted back in really bad. After he rejoined, Kevin had to follow all of Homelander's orders due to his threats. Meanwhile, he kept having conflicts with Cassandra, and of course, how can we forget his infamous sexual tryst with the octopus? During Homelander's quest to take control of the planet, the Deep supported him while also getting into a sexual relationship with Sister Sage, who had newly joined the Seven. Compared to that, in the Garth Ennis comics, the Deep is barely a supporting character who was created from the altered DNA of Stormfront. Of course, here too, he's a seasoned member of the Seven and is popularly known as the King of the Seas, although the comic version of the Deep is mostly seen as a civilized and mature guy who often bears the brunt of contempt for others' racism and disregard. He occasionally finds himself in embarrassing flukes that steal his so-called thunder, like the time he went to the boys' Flatiron HQ to confront them, only for Butcher to slam the door in his face after asking him to leave. Now, in contrast to the series, when Starlight was sexually assaulted on her first day with the Seven, that act was actually committed by Homelander, A-Train, and Black Noir within the comics, which was horrible because they're the most powerful members and the biggest celebrities on the world's best superhero team. However, the Deep was the only major male member of the Seven behind the panels who wasn't involved, but that didn't mean he didn't think about it. I guess that absence was made as a specific creative choice for his character, but the show reversed it by putting this act on the Deep instead of Homelander. I mean, yes, Deep in the comics is still very much a self-serving guy and a compromised Vought employee without any redeeming qualities that would make him a role model, but at least the comic didn't cross a line for him, which the show completely overlooked even before the opening credits, thus changing the entire foundation of his character, which set him apart in the comics. Soldier Boy. Benjamin, aka Soldier Boy, is introduced as the first and greatest superhero in America, at least before Homelander came along. He even led Payback at one point, and apparently, as a young man, Soldier Boy fought in World War II to make sure that good triumphed over evil, which is what made him a widely celebrated and acclaimed war hero. Even though he claims to have put in great effort during the war, we're not sure how much of that is true, as the legend has mentioned how his participation in the war was Vought propaganda, whereas Stan Edgar actually claimed that he killed Germans by the dozens. With his superhero team Payback by his side, he was said to have fought for liberty and justice for all until his disappearance during a botched military operation in Nicaragua, with the cover story being that he heroically sacrificed his own life to save America from a nuclear power plant meltdown in 1984. In reality, the real shakedown happened in Season 3 when the myth around Soldier Boy started to dismantle, as he turned out to be a racist and a rapist. In fact, his colleagues were so terrified of him that Soldier Boy was actually betrayed by them just so they could escape. With Vaught's approval, they sold him out to the Russians, who would later conduct dozens of agonizing experiments on him over the next 4 decades. Much like Homelander, Soldier Boy was esteemed by the public, but due to the news, Starlight's recent expose about his recent actions, and Vaught's slanderous lies, his fame and reputation have completely crumbled. In fact, he's a returning antagonist in Season 5. In fact, Soldier Boy is unfrozen and immediately put to work by Homelander to track down Butcher and the gang and end any potential threats to Vought, but of course, Homelander forgot to mention that virus that can take out superpowered beings. Even though he successfully found Butcher, Huey, and the other boys, Soldier Boy was exposed to the deadly chemicals and seemingly dies. Of course, it seems as though he maybe woke up right before the credits rolled by jolting up from his gurney behind Homelander, even though he was inside a body bag and presumed dead, thus ending the episode on a high note and a crazy cliffhanger. Now, in the comics, Soldier Boy is a legacy hero, and the moniker is a lineage carried on by 3 different people who have used the name across different eras, with each of them being even worse than the one before them. The original, depicted in the Barbary Coast flashback arc, was a World War II-era character led by a young Greg Mallory, who was a well-intentioned, fully motivated, but dangerously undertrained guy. His poor tactical decisions during the Battle of the Bulge led to a massacre of both his own squad and the American soldiers they were supposed to protect. He also died in that same conflict after being mortally wounded in battle. But the guy wasn't a monster, he was just someone who genuinely believed in what he was doing and wasn't quite equipped to do it. Each subsequent Soldier Boy who took on the name degraded that legacy further, as the second was barely a footnote, and the present-day third Soldier Boy is essentially a joke. He was a coward, desperate to join the Seven before he was eventually killed by Butcher without much ceremony. It seems like the show took that final, most degraded version of the name and projected it all the way back to the beginning, while also deciding that the founding character of the whole mythology was a predator hiding in plain sight from day one. And sadly, that brings us to the end of this video. Given how different and reinvigorating these characters are in the show, we don't think changing them from their comic book versions was much of a disservice, and in many cases, it even made the character better, but that's just our 2 cents. We'd love to hear your thoughts, though, in the comment section down below, so let us know which change from the comics to the TV show was the best and which was the worst. Also, if you enjoyed this video, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe so we know to make more stuff like it. Otherwise, thanks for watching, stay safe out there, and we'll see ya in the next one. Bye for now!